Welcome back, everyone. It's Mike from Two-Headed Giant, and we have finally worked our way down to the final playlist, the final deck. As we mentioned, there were a total of 8 decks, obviously, in the top 8, but there were only 6 different decks among them. 3 of them were this deck that we're going to talk about today. And that is, well, before we talk about that deck, let's talk about what didn't get there. Simic Nexus actually got beat by Esper Control and got knocked out. The Gruul aggro, or as I call it, Mono Red Gruul, it actually got knocked out by Reduke's Mono Blue list, which is the deck we're talking about today. The only Azorius aggro to make the top 8, that actually got knocked out by, is it Phoenix? And then finally, which that one actually surprised me a little bit, and then finally we have Mono Blue. 3 decks in the top 8 running Mono Blue. So, here we are. The heart and absolute freaking soul of the deck, Curious Obsession. Make sure you're attacking with it if you play it, but this is the card that absolutely wins you games. Almost every game that you play, not quite every game, but if you play this and can protect the creature it's on, you win. And this deck has more protection than a frat house, so, it's going to get there a lot of times. This is what Burchett, this is the list that Burchett took and won the Mythic Championship with. So, of course, 4 Curious Obsessions. So, one thing that you'll notice is the extremely, extremely low mana curve of this deck. It's interesting, it plays, where are they? It plays 19 of the old island here. Autumn actually sideboarded a 20th island. Reed Duke in his list played 20 islands, so there's a little bit of variance as to what gets played here in the main board. So Curious Obsession, it's a 1-drop. You're going to hear me say that a lot. So that's almost your win condition. So Autumn only played 1 Mistcloak Herald, unblockable. Seems like the perfect character to put this on, but the list is really tight. It does still run 9 1-drop creatures, which still gives you an incredibly good chance of having one open hand, and it plays more ways to protect them than the other lists. Reed Dukes and the other Mono Blue, which was piloted by Julian Berteau. I'm hoping I'm not murdering that name. That is, they both had 3 Mistcloaked Heralds, and their number of lands varied. So, Scary Terry, 4 Terramanders. Early game, he's great because he flies, he gets over things. Late game, for usually fairly inexpensive, becomes a 5/5 flyer, and he gets there. It becomes really scary late game. Siren Storm Tamer, you play this guy to protect your creatures by sacking him off. So there's our 9 1-drop creatures. Then we have 4 2-drop creatures, which is our Merfolk Trickster. He is a critical card for both being able to drop in as a surprise blocker. I've seen some, just playing on Arena, I've had some players who, with me having 2 open mana, they attack with a Llanowar Elf, just to try to eke in 1 damage, and they lose their elf to this guy. Like, he does a lot of work, whether it's tapping something down so you can swing in, or whether it is tapping to prevent something from attacking. Merfolk Trickster is an incredible card. And then, of course, Tempest Djinn. This guy becomes a 3/4 when he comes out, at the very least, and, as you get more mana, 4/4, 5/4, 6/4, and on up. The longer the match goes, the scarier this guy is. But these creatures don't mean a lot without ways to make them better, because we know everything dies to removal except in this deck because it protects its stuff. So opt is very important to make sure that you hit whatever piece you're needing. It helps narrow your deck, which is very important, and helps you to be able to search whether you need a Curious Obsession or a 1-drop to put it on. There's a lot of nuance to this deck. If you're playing against Mono Red and they're going first and you only have 1 1-drop, it's very possible that you play one of your 1-drop protections You wait till you, like, if you have a 1-drop protection and a 1-drop, that you play them both second turn and play a little bit slower, and then opt on your first turn if you have it. So talking about protection, of course, dive down is one of the premier ways to protect your creatures. This Autumn ran a full 4, and I completely agree with that move. A lot of, I think both of the other players who ran it ran 3. I've seen some winners in the last week only running 2. I don't know why you wouldn't want 4, except it's a tight list. Spell Pierce. This is a 3 of in the deck. This is the other piece that's very important early on to making sure that you don't get shocked, lightning bolted, lava coiled, moment of craving, whatever it is. And it's frankly rather important. You know, they get 5 mana, even 6 mana, and it stops a Teferi, it stops a Ral, it stops Kaya's Wrath when they're on less than 6 mana. It does a whole lot. This is the card right here that pretty much saves the deck and makes a lot of it sing, makes it what it is. Essence Capture. I think this was previously a 1 of in a lot of lists, and I played those lists, and I felt like I always wanted more. Well, Autumn played 2 Essence Captures. This not only boosts your creatures to make them more powerful, but making sure you can stop that creature that you can't deal with, whether it's a big flyer or whether it's something that's just going to allow them to race you. Having a couple ways to be able to deal with them, a couple of extra ways is important. 1 negate in the main board is something I hadn't seen previously, but it just makes a ton of sense. You need to be able to stop their spells. 4 Wizard's Retort, another hard counter to anything that they can play. And if you have your Siren Storm Tamer or your Merfolk Trickster out, they're both your wizards in the deck, and so you can actually cast this for a little bit cheaper. Chart, of course, is one that previously I'd seen 2. I've seen 3 of in the list. Today I saw 2 lists that ran 1. The other one that I find interesting mainboarding this, and this is a growingly relevant card in Standard today, is Entrancing Melody. This is so good against a number of things. It's great against, it's great against stealing your opponent's cards in aggro that are causing you the most problem, saying that Adanto is mine, saying that if you can get up to the 5 mana and steal the Benelish Marshal, give all your guys 1/1, it's gross. Right now, one of the most popular decks at the start of this cycle was Sultai, and there's a few things that are run with this that run with Krasis, but Hydroid Krasis, this is a great way. They get a big Krasis out in the field, and for 4 mana, that Krasis is now mine. It gets things out of your way, allows you to keep doing the work that you need to do, so it's a 1 of in the main board. Now, onto the sideboard, because the sideboard, there could be a bit of controversy, but again, this was piloted to perfection by Autumn, so 1 more Essence Capture. Now, I only have 3 of this card, but a full 4 of Entrancing Melody was played in this list. Very, very powerful card in the format right now. Disdainful Stroke, this is great from countering everything from your Planeswalkers to your boards wipes to your just creatures that you're going to lose if they get that creature on the field. So, obviously, it's in the sideboard because it's obviously bad against things like mono white or Azorius aggro. There's a number of things that it's really bad against. It's not really great against red. It might hit their Experimental Frenzy, but outside of that, that's probably it. You can side it in if you're seeing a whole bunch of not Arclight Phoenixes, Rekindling Phoenixes. So 2 Deep Freezes. Should a Niv Mizzet show up anywhere, this is one of the best ways that this deck has to deal with that. But it hits a number of creatures where losing all their abilities will make them a threat. So it runs 2 of those. It runs just 1 negate, and that really surprised me. Of course, there's let me look at her list. Yes. It ran through. I'm sorry. I apologize. 3 negates in the sideboard. I was thinking a different deck. 3 negates in the sideboard. Surge Mare. Surge Mare was a 3 of in the sideboard. And I'm going to actually flip this card because that's not part of the sideboard. Surge Mare is good for a couple of different decks. It's actually fairly reasonable against control for the fact that it avoids things like Moment of Craving and Cry of the Carnarium, which are really good against your deck. And putting this guy in is really good. Of course, green can't block him, and then you can make you. He lets you also against control be able during those long grindy games be able to cycle through your deck. And he's really good against red as well because at 5 toughness, it is really hard to burn this guy off the field. So if they tap out, it's a great time to turn around, swing with him, start filtering, get extra lands out of your hand. Pretty good card. And then the interesting one is I've still never seen this actually in play during any of these big tournaments, but a Jace Cunning Castaway allows you to both filter through your deck and create some blue illusion tokens. I would tend to think that this would be probably best against mid-range and possibly even more so against control, but I haven't seen this being sided in, so it's really hard to say, but this was part of the 75 for Autumn. So just to talk about a couple other cards that were not in Autumn's list, that were in other lists in the top here, let's take a look. So Diamond Mare. So before I jump into this, Autumn actually had to beat both other mono blue players. The first one being Julian Bertot's mono blue tempo deck, and he ran 2 Diamond Mares. And I personally really like Diamond Mare. If you have the ability to protect your creatures against red, who is trying to race you and burn you out, I really like the ability to keep him on the field and just keep gaining life. They're going to run out of cards trying to race you if you have this guy out, in my opinion. That being said, I mean, sometimes they just have so many 3 damage spells that, if you don't have the dive down, or they might be able to drop another one in response to the first one. I've seen a lot of situations with mono red where it gets ugly, and maybe that is why this didn't make the list for Autumn, but I really like this inclusion in that one other list. So other cards. This one was very interestingly, because I haven't seen anybody else play this. This one was in Reed Duke's list, Transmogrifying Wand. Sorry, our resolution keeps jumping in and out here. You have the ability to basically destroy a creature, which blue really lacks, and to be able to do it multiple times. It's a 3 mana to come in. It does give them a 2/4, but if you're getting rid of big problems, like I see this being really good against some green decks. If they end up resolving a big threat on you, this could be a way to deal with that. Or just any creature that, you're having trouble dealing with. Turning a Drake that's huge into a 2/4 Ox seems pretty dang good, especially when you're flying or unblockable. I did see one Sleep being played, basically tapping all of somebody's creatures. If you're having games where you're seeing board state build sideways a lot and you're not able to push through, this is what kind of helps you get through and get a sudden win out of nowhere. A good card. Just it's hard fitting it in the list, especially at 4 mana. This isn't actually in anybody's sideboard. Like I said, 2 of the other players were actually just mainboarding 3 instead of 1. Playing only one of these is a little more aggressive. It means that you might be mulliganing more often to make sure you have your 1-drop creature. But that being said, when you get your 1-drop creatures, it's meaning that you have more dive downs and more spell pierces and negates to protect them. So you make sure that your guy stays out there, and that is the wins condition. So, especially once you have the Curious Obsession. If with Curious Obsession, you drawing extra cards every single turn when you're attacking, this is a great guy to play it on, but it's tough because the other 8 1-drops besides this guy are all better. They do more important things. This was a 1 of in a couple of sideboards, and I've seen it as much as a 2 of. And I would tend to think that this would probably be good against red. It would probably be good against maybe even white. It's a great way to both block a flyer, like whether you're dealing with a Healer's Hawk or whether you're just basically forcing what would normally be a trade but ends up becoming a favorable exchange with red, like Viashino. All of a sudden this guy comes in, Viashino has no power, and he wipes it out. So they may still nuke him off the face of the earth in response to him coming out, but it's an option, so it'll still save you the damage. Exclusion Mage was also played by both other blue players, being able to bounce things. I'm kind of iffy about this just because there are so many enter the battlefields. Now that Sultai/Golgari is being edged out of the format, I think that this is starting to become a little bit better because it works really well against white. You know, when they think that they have a great blocking state, and then you use this to bounce their Benelish Marshal, or similarly against Celestia tokens, getting rid of their Tristani. Now they're going to get more dudes back next turn, so you better make sure it's worth it. But this is a great way to make sure that you have some really favorable exchanges. Very control-oriented. I've seen this played as a one-of in some of the lists. It's not a bad card. I don't think it made any of the Mythic Championship decks. Come on, focus there. Blink of an eye, being able to bounce things. You can even use it to bounce your Curious Obsessions if you're about to lose something. This was cut from these lists, and I'm kind of a fan of that. So Chart, of course, like I said before, this is a one of in the list. I've seen it as a two of, as a three of. I think typically a two of, but people are cutting it to play an Entrancing Melody main board that did get main board in two of the lists. And so anyway, I hope you guys found this helpful. We're going a little bit long, but hey, this is the Mythic Championship deck here, and it's quite an incredible list. And I've been playing the mono blue, and I'm curious to try this version of it to see if it indeed gets there. We're getting a big glare on these cards over here, so let's put them where you guys can see more over here. So anyway, there we go. Just provide some shade with the hand. So if you guys enjoyed this, make sure to shoot us a thumbs up if you found it helpful. You know, I really like the deck. I've had a lot of fun playing it. It's a little frustrating at times because the draws can feel finicky, and against some decks it feels underpowered, but you still somehow manage to get there. It's a finesse deck. It is not a brute force, raw power kind of deck. It is a slow and steady wins the race, and occasionally Tempest Djinn will just power through things. You know, being able to throw lots of counters on the field. Sometimes I've had a lot of people just scoop after you counter their third straight spell. But, you know, once you're in a serious competitive environment, that may not always happen. So, would love to hear from you in the comments. Have you played this deck? Have you had success against this deck consistently? I know everybody beats it every so often. You know, my mono blue deck, I lost to an Esper in a tournament, and a different Esper deck won that tournament, and then I've won 3 games in a row against that. So this has very strong returns against most decks. Right now, I think part of the reason it's so good in the format is because we have a lot of Wilderness Reclamation decks, whether it's a Nexus deck, or we also have just a good bit of control, and this just gets underneath a lot of decks that are comboing off and stops them from doing what they do. And that's so important in that it steals a lot of those games by being able to counter the important cards. So don't forget to subscribe, guys, if you haven't yet. And I'm going to have more videos coming from you. I've got a really fun red, green, blue deck that I'm going to be highlighting coming up soon here, so watch for that video. I played against this one and with my Sultai deck, and it absolutely was just devastating. It draws more cards and has more counters than anything you want to play against. Nasty deck. So don't forget to subscribe. Make sure you come back and let your friends know about us. We are growing. We appreciate your support. So we will see you next time. This is Mike from Two-Headed Giant, and have fun playing some cards.